Tonight on Primetime Politics, a constitution for Quebec.
We need to protect our values, our identity, our rights.
The Legault government tables a draft constitution protecting the French language, secularism, and the right to name candidates to both the Senate and the Supreme Court. Is the federal government ready for the potential conflict this constitution might create? The Ottawa bureau chiefs will weigh in. Also, political strategist Tim Powers and polls analyst Éric Grenier will set us up for next week's provincial vote in Newfoundland and Labrador. Plus,
once we're at the table, we can help drive through these projects. We want to be part of the solution.
Making Indigenous participation a strategic advantage for national projects. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, as many Canadians know, Quebec never signed the Constitution Act of 1982, but on Thursday, the government of François Legault did introduce a draft proposal for a Quebec Constitution, a document the provincial government says would, quote, affirm Quebec's distinct national character. But it also has the potential to create more tension between the province and Ottawa. Take a listen right now to how Quebec's Justice Minister answered a question about this proposal.
What do you say to Quebecers about the raison d'être of this Quebec Constitution?
I say to them that's a will for over 200 years. And that's really important for Quebecers to be able to recognize themselves in a constitution that will protect, strengthen, and unite them.
But why now, and what impact would this proposal have on provincial-federal relations? Well, I put those questions to the bureau chiefs earlier today. Okay, Joël-Denis, I'm going to get you to start us off this week because this constitution proposal, as outlined in the draft, would, among other things, affirm French as the only common language in Quebec. It would affirm secularism, also the equality of men and women. Why this proposal? Why now?
Well, it came out a bit of nowhere. There was no consultation made by the Quebec government, and as you know, the Legault government is in deep trouble, poll-wise, and I think it's a way to try to stir the Quebec nationalism so that people who have went over the Parti Québécois come back to the Coalition Avenir Québec. But I don't think it's going to work because as in everywhere else in Canada, in Quebec, the main issue is cost of living, rising cost of living and also access to a home, buying to property. So it's an attempt by a desperate government trying desperately to get back into the political game, and we're a year away from the Quebec election. The election is expected in October 2026, so it's the last, I think, attempt by François Legault to stir back people in his way. And remember, he had a big cabinet shuffle, threw out some members out of his cabinet in an attempt to rejig his government. It has failed to do that, and if an election was held today, the Coalition Avenir government would be obliterated on the political scene.
So a political move here for François Legault's political survival. Although, if adopted, and even if not adopted, it raises things like enshrining into this Quebec Constitution this idea that it would be Quebec that would name candidates for the Senate as well as the Supreme Court, that it would be Quebec that would name a candidate for... I'll get to it in a second. But like, it would be a candidate for even Governor General, which would actually be Lieutenant Governor, which would not be vice-regal, but an officer of Quebec moving away from the monarchy. So it does create the potential for tension between Quebec City and Ottawa.
Some of those are non-starters legally and judicially in Canada. Those questions have already been tested and settled at the Supreme Court, which has accorded not to provinces the right to name senators or a governor general or have a say, and that's the federal government. So what I think, though, is really interesting, it's a bit of a wake-up call, though, to, I think, the Mark Carney government, which isn't paying a whole lot of attention to Quebec politics right now. It's so much focused on the economy and trade and, diversifying defense and economy ties that I think it's just not on their radar. The fact that in the next year there is going to be a Quebec election and the specter of separatism back in our political conversation nationally. And I don't sense that they've got their finger on the pulse of that yet. They don't see, they're not considering it. I'm told, you know, is it weighing into everything? Is that a lens that's being put on everything? No, it's just not being, it's not their lens. Their lens is the economy and trade. And so I think it's a wake-up call.
You know, and what's telling of that is yesterday when the media was asking members of cabinet as they were walking in and out of the cabinet caucus their reaction to this Quebec Constitution, all of them basically answered, well, I haven't looked at it yet. I haven't read it yet. So that underlines what you're saying. Someone should have
sent them lines out yesterday morning.
Well, we'll see what happens when Parliament gets back. Bob, what do you make of this? Because as I say, a real potential for conflict here between the province and the federal government.
I don't see it the same way. I don't think it's that much of a conflict. Already, in terms of the senators, they don't have any authority. I mean, the federal government will announce whoever they want to announce, and there's nothing. You can have have whatever you want. It's not going to make any difference. The federal government usually does consult with the province about who's going to be the lieutenant government. Yeah. That's sort of a respectful thing that's already in place. And in terms of the other measures in the bill, that's sort of, we all accept that with Quebec. That Quebec has a right to protect its language and its culture. I suppose the only thing that is a bit controversial is the fact that this Constitution would forbid anybody who gets federal money to be able to challenge using the courts to challenge parts of the Constitution, particularly dealing with secularism and whatnot. Although we've gone through that ourselves with Stephen Harper. When he did the court challenges program, he got rid of that. It was a very similar program. But on balance, to me, this doesn't seem to be, I mean, Zadie may speak better to me on this issue than me, but... As
somebody who has watched the separatist movement and separatist federalist debate in Quebec, I'm more worried about the future of Alberta in Canada than Quebec leaving the nation because of pipeline politics. And that is a bigger issue. And also because of the kind of referendum that Madame Smith, the Premier in Alberta, is ready to allow to go on. It's like you put out the dentifrice out of the tube, but you can't get it back. So it becomes, a political bomb. And in Quebec, the separatist issue is not on the radar right now. And young people are not, bragging for a referendum tomorrow, and leads me to think that the future of Canada is more, at stake between Ottawa and Alberta than Quebec and Ottawa for the first time. Because when Mr. Legault announced this, it barely made the news in Quebec. Mm-hmm. We talked about the visit of Mr. Carney in Washington, other issues dealing with the big trucks involved in big accident in Quebec on the highways than the Constitution that François Legault would like to adopt.
Although when I saw the story, I will say that it was earlier or late last year we were talking about what would a Poilievre government have to face if in fact Pierre Poilievre became the next prime minister, and part of that equation was the fact that the polls were indicating that the next government in Quebec would be the Parti Québécois, and the possibility of having to deal with a referendum. Does it mean, though, with this proposal that this government's going to have to deal, maybe not with a referendum, but how to deal with Quebec nationalism at a time when it's really, to your point, not on their radar?
But the François Legault government is trying to stir the pot of identity politics, of nationalism, but so far it has failed, because whenever Mr. Legault talks, it's like the other mandate of Justin Trudeau. Nobody's listening to him anymore. So it's a big swipe, but it's a swipe in the water. It doesn't have any political consequences so far, I would say.
But a wake-up call for the government at the very least?
It could be, but it depends how the Parti Québécois tries to take the claims of that. But again, the issues dominating the mind of Quebecers is cost of living, access to housing, property access, not political shenanigans about the Constitution.
But I think, Michael, to your point, is that we always have to be careful about how we manage Quebec. It can go very quickly in a direction that is not very good for the country. Nationalism is a dangerous phenomenon in Quebec, and this government has not really had to deal with it. But the potential always lies there for any government.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll watch and see where that goes. Let's switch our topic right now. You mentioned Mark Carney in Washington, and yes, the Prime Minister did go to Washington this week. He met with Donald Trump. Some nice words were exchanged, but since that meeting, we heard from the U.S. Commerce Secretary on Wednesday. He says any future deal on the auto industry will necessarily include tariffs. And then today, on Friday, Mark Carney talked about, just how difficult it has and continues to be to negotiate a path forward. Take a listen to the Prime Minister from Friday.
This is not one simple, as if any trade deal is simple, but one simple trade deal which will resolve all the issues, and that's why we're focused on retaining the huge advantage that we have relative to the rest of the world through USMCA, that 85%, the lowest tariff of any country, and working hard on these sectors where we're looking for things that other countries have not received.
Okay. Again, the Prime Minister from Friday. I will say, I was in Washington, and I was watching everything that goes down, and obviously we don't know what the path forward is at this moment in time. But I think there is now bits and pieces that we are forming an idea of what a future trade relationship with the United States is going to be. And I'll immediately put out there, no tariffs across the board is not that future. I'm kind of wondering from what you're hearing, Bob, what you see emerging on the trade front between Canada and the United States.
Well, first of all, that was a surprisingly good meeting for the Prime Minister with the President of the United States. Federal officials going into this had no idea how this was going to turn out. Nobody does when you're dealing with Donald Trump. He was very complimentary about the Prime Minister, effusive in some ways. Even after the working lunch, they stayed over and they were socializing. Everything was really good, and there has been real momentum now in these talks. Dominic LeBlanc, who's in charge of U.S. trade, and our Canadian ambassador, Kristen Hillman, and as well as the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Saby, stayed over after that meeting. They've been making significant progress. I believe that Mr. LeBlanc will be going back early next week to continue these talks, to build on the momentum of what happened out of that. But nobody should be under any illusion that we are going to face tariffs. We are going to face probably quotas on either automobiles or steel, or probably not aluminum, because Americans do need our aluminum. The world has changed. This is a tariff president, and we're not going to be tariff-free at all. It's not going to be whatever agreement we get out of this is not going to be great, but it's going to be better than it is now. It's still going to allow Pierre Poilievre to get up in the House of Commons and say, you promised elbows up, you promised to get a good deal for Canada, this is not a good deal. We're never going to get a good deal out of this president. But we're going to try to get the best deal we possibly can.
And that was Robert Fife, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Along with him, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for LaPresse. Thank you to them. And what you heard is part of a new podcast from PrimeTime Politics and CPAC. It is called The Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio. New episodes will drop each Friday that PrimeTime's Politics is on air. This week's episode also gets into the latest trade talks with the United States and assesses the Prime Minister's performance since Parliament's return. You can get the latest episode now. Well, speaking of the Prime Minister, Mark Carney did give us a preview today of his government's first budget. That budget will not be out until November the 4th, but we now know that it will include the following: the permanent implementation of the National School Food Program, an extension of the Canada Strong Pass, which grants free access to national parks and museums, and automatic tax filing for low-income Canadians, a move the government says could help low-income Canadians access thousands of dollars a year in benefits.
A single parent with 2 young children who earns $15,000 from a part-time job is eligible for substantial federal and provincial benefits. And using this new system, the CRA's new automated and free process, they'll need to just provide a few details, confirm their information on a pre-filled out tax form from the CRA. And then they will receive all the benefits to which they're entitled.
Well, to Newfoundland and Labrador now, where on Tuesday, people in the province will cast their ballots for a new provincial government. And earlier this week, the three main party leaders took part in a televised debate where the issues before the electorate was laid out, everything from affordability to healthcare, and the Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, for Churchill Falls.
I actually agree with Mr. Din. This is not a political deal. This is not a Liberal deal. This is a Newfoundland and Labrador deal, and we absolutely do need to get it right. And the MOU is the backbone for an amazing opportunity for this province, the likes of which we haven't seen and we will never see again. So we do need to get it right.
Better health care, lower taxes, safer communities for all of us. And we've been talking about that since the campaign began, because the number one issue in this campaign is not the MOU or the secret deal with Quebec. It's actually health care.
If you want to think big, what we're offering here in our platform is thinking big, but making it more non-market, community-based housing that's going to take care of the deeply affordable and supportive the housing that people need.
With more on the provincial vote, we're now joined by Tim Powers, chairman of Summa Strategies, host as well of the Tim Powers Show in Newfoundland and Labrador. Great title. How long did it take you to come up with that one?
Hours, days.
Days. The consultants were on it. With him, Éric Grenier, polls analyst, founder, and the writer of The Writ. Hello to both of you.
Hello. Good to be here, despite the abuse.
Well, I missed it. I'm glad you're back. That said, Éric, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, shut up, buddy. Go ahead, Éric.
Because, you know, unlike many other elections, there hasn't been a lot of polling around this vote. Why is that?
Well, Newfoundland and Labrador is not a big place. There aren't any pollsters that are based in it that put out numbers publicly. It is an expensive place to poll. It's hard to do polls online there. You can do an online poll in Ontario and Quebec pretty easily. In Newfoundland and Labrador, a lot more difficult. And no one wants to pay for a poll. And so this is the reason why we haven't seen any numbers. Before this campaign, we hadn't seen any numbers since November 2024. So we were going into the campaign a little bit of a black box. We have a little bit of a better idea of how it might shape out, but even that, it's still pretty foggy.
Okay. I'm going to get you to share what you do know. That's fine. I will note the fact that Tim was laughing when he said no one is willing to pay for a poll.
We're Newfoundlanders. We like to keep our money close.
I appreciate that. But let's take a look at a board that we do have here. And this is the legislature at dissolution and the seat count at dissolution. Walk us through what the numbers that we're looking at here and what you're extrapolating from the numbers that are available to you.
There might actually be not that much change based on what we've seen just this recently. Now, there was a poll that had been done in the middle of the summer, and it was done at the height of the wildfires when John Hogan was pretty much on TV every single day and handling that crisis. And the Liberal numbers in that poll by Narrative Research were very good. They were up by about 29 points. There has been a poll that's been conducted this past week, just before the debates that took place on Wednesday. It was done by MQO Research for Global Public Affairs. And Global Public Affairs had shared their numbers with their clients, but I've also gotten a look at those numbers. And it did suggest that it is actually a pretty tight race between the Liberals and the PCs. Couple points between them, really 3 points based on the poll that I saw. If you extrapolate that into the seat math, you could end up with a very similar House of Assembly than what we saw at dissolution, which means that could be a razor-thin minority majority, really for either party. You'd still probably give the Liberals the better chance, but I think it could be a lot closer than some people might have been expecting.
Which is interesting, because if you compare it to the narrative numbers that you were talking about that earlier, released in August, it showed a 20-point spread, but much closer this time around. Okay, so Tim, as I say, you have this radio show, VOCM, if you want to listen to it. I'm wondering, from what you're hearing from Éric, if that matches up what you are hearing through the program and through the people and contacts you have in Newfoundland.
There's certainly an enthusiasm deficit, or people are sick of elections because we had the federal election, and Newfoundland and Labrador just went through its provincial cycle of municipal elections. They had really low turnout in the St. John's municipal election, and I think people are struggling to find an interest here, which is unfortunate. It also makes it more difficult, even with the numbers Éric's talked about, for the opposition leader who is trying to campaign on change. There was a debate earlier this week, Michael, and it was perhaps the most lackluster debate I have seen come out of Newfoundland and Labrador in a long time. We have gone from a politic of fiery orators and in-your-face, raucous behavior to quieter, more sedate type of oratory. And while that on the whole is probably not bad, it's not helpful, I think, if you're trying to make a change argument. In terms of what, look, I've talked to all three leaders, I've had them on. Why this is probably tighter, if the MQO numbers are right, I don't dispute them, is because the cost of living. Like national polling we're seeing now, everybody is focused on cost of living, and there's also some anxiety in Newfoundland and Labrador around crime and health care. So if you're the incumbent government and you've been there for 10 years, people are wondering, well, can it get any better under you? And that's certainly what Mr. Wakeham, the opposition leader, is trying to argue. So the other thing hanging about is the Memorandum of Understanding between Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec about the future of Churchill Falls, announced with much fanfare by former Premier Furey, adopted and run with by Premier Hogan. It's hard to tell beyond an elite cadre of people who are actually having a pretty active discussion about it whether that's connecting with people in ways any of the parties would like.
Which is interesting because being the national media, the only real issue that's come to the forefront or has been written about has been the MOU around Churchill, and we're talking about billions of dollars across $250 billion
thereabouts
across 50 years for Newfoundland and Labrador. And I remember when that was announced, great fanfare, as you say, and celebration that there's going to be finally some redress about the economic imbalance with Quebec over that deal. So that enthusiasm has now died?
Well, we've seen a group, they're called, we have two groups of 9, Michael, so 18. In the group of 9 opposing the MOU because they're upset with a number of terms of the contract is former Premier Danny Williams. Now, Premier Williams is still a very polarizing figure in the province, and people are critical of what he did with Muskrat Falls, and then there's another group of business people who are supporting it. They've been in this back and forth, but it's almost become an elite conversation. So most people are still trying to navigate, all right, should I be for it? Should I be against it? Why are people against it who used to lead the province? It's very confusing despite the apparent jobs that will come and the injection of new revenue, which a lot of the Liberal promises are based on.
Okay, so here we have a few days before the people in the province go to the polls. What are you watching out for, Eric, given this tighter number that you're now hearing?
Well, I'm really curious to see if the results we see in the provincial election will match a little bit what we saw in the federal election. The Liberals did very well in the Avalon Peninsula. Their numbers went way up in St. John's. The Conservatives did really well in the rest of the island of Newfoundland, so central, western, eastern Newfoundland. If we see the same kind of gains for the PCs, and the numbers that we've seen from that polling that was done does suggest that that's possible, it really will come down to whether the Liberals can make gains in and around St. John's enough to hold on to power, or if the PCs are going to make enough gains in the rest of the province to topple the Liberals. So it really is to see if that historic pattern gets flipped, because for decades and decades, St. John's was really strong for the PCs. Now it's looking pretty strong for the Liberals.
Okay, so interesting to keep an eye on those races. Tim, what do you?
Yeah, there's also a very traditional thing in the Newfoundland campaign, the rural-urban divide. Tony Wakeham has been appealing to rural Newfoundlanders who are in those 3 federal Conservative districts to deliver that. You win in Newfoundland and Labrador, at least majorities, if you win outside of St. John. So I would be watching for that on election night on Tuesday, but Mr. Wakeham has had trouble getting people to buy into change. The Liberals have been in power for 10 years. Newfoundland and Labrador, as Eric knows, we have long cycles still, 10, 12, 13 years. I don't know if there's enough juice in the tank or in the engine to get the PCs across the line, but maybe there is.
Okay, well, we are watching. Eric, thank you for being here. Tim, nice to have you back. And for those that miss you, yeah, well, you left us to start a radio show, which you can listen to on VOCM. See how nice I am.
You're a very kind man.
Guys, thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
As Canada moves forward with major national projects, the Prime Minister created an Indigenous Advisory Council last month. Now, in theory, this council would ensure Indigenous consultation and participation with all projects the government champions. But how it would work in reality, well, that is something I discussed with J.P. Gladu recently, a principal at Makwate and a former CEO of the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business. Gladu is now a member of that Indigenous Advisory Council, and part of our discussion focused on a potential pipeline from Alberta to BC and the opposition some Indigenous groups have expressed about that project.
Well, firstly, yes, there are nations that are opposed, but let's look at the recent Enbridge deals, both in Alberta and BC. You know, in BC, there was 37, 38 nations coming together on a pipeline. In Alberta, 23 nations, including Métis groups. So we have to be very careful in making these generalizations that nations are opposed to resource development. That old narrative, we have to stop saying that, because there are many nations that are very pro-resource development when it's done right, when they're at the table managing routes, when they're at the table with the jobs and the procurement opportunities, and more at the table actually from equitable positions. But there are, like any society, there are going to be communities that are opposed. Now, I actually have to commend, some of the headlines that I've been reading in this. Premier Smith has certainly come out and saying and actually acknowledging, like, working with nations is going to be an incredibly important part of this conversation, and that's why she's flagging it with nations. It is a different mindset background in Alberta and in BC traditionally, but we're starting to see those lines starting to blur a little bit, because nations are starting to see the opportunities to guide projects, to be a part of them. As far as the business case goes, I mean, Trans Mountain shows that there's a big business case for our product, especially given what's happening in the U.S. with the tariffs and the trade wars that we're having. Nations across the Pacific Rim are using Canadian oil products, and that's great. We need more of our products going to global markets, whether that be gas or oil. We've got to diversify our clients, just like any business. And, I think Prime Minister Carney is doing a great job. He's getting out there in the world markets and going, listen, Canada has a lot to offer in critical minerals, oil, gas. There is a business case for it. Now, some of the policies have to line up to make that, because there's talks of Canada being a super energy country, a superpower. Nations are going to be a part of that conversation and actually part of that equation, more importantly.
Mm-hmm. Listen, I have about a minute left, and there is never enough time with you, because I've sat through conferences where you've given speeches, taking part panels. I always want to hear more, but I think it's worthwhile to pick up on a point that you made. This idea that working with Indigenous communities in this country can be the competitive advantage. Explain that to us.
When First Nations, and I'm being as a First Nation person, or Métis or Inuit communities, when you're in our territories, there's been plenty of court cases. Our rights are strong. You're not going to circumvent them. So then work with us to be able to get projects built by ensuring that we're on the ground, that we're, the whole idea of free, prior, and informed consent, the informed piece, make sure that our communities are informed and adequately resourced from human and technical capacity to be at the table with large resource companies. Again, I think what Enbridge has done has been incredible. They've resourced the communities to be partners at the table. They supported their technical advisors in finance and the environment, their elders, their leaders coming to the table. Communities felt informed. If communities don't feel informed, it doesn't matter what your culture is. If you don't feel informed, you're going to say no. So once we're at the table, we can help drive through these projects. We want to be part of the solution. We want responsible resource development projects that are going to advance our socioeconomic well-being, which we've been locked out of for a very long time. So consider us as your equitable partners, consider us as your procurement, supply chains, and your workforce. We'll get behind you side by side, and we'll advance projects together, and that's being proven across the country.
J.P. Gladu, appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Michael.
And our thanks there to J.P. Gladu. The full discussion can be found on the CPAC website and on our YouTube channel. Well, that is our program for this Friday. Parliament is adjourned next week, so we'll see you when MPs come back on the 20th. Until then, I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Take care and have a very happy Thanksgiving.